have to know that patents and copyrights were invented in the 15th century by the Venetians, those great state monopolists, to know that they're very dangerous and they should be held to a very short period. But here's the big problem with regulation in a progressing economy, which is that the regulation relates to the present technology. It has to, because if there's any truth in this world, it's that we don't know what the next technology would be. There was a concern as recently as 3 years ago about the crowding of the internet. We wouldn't have enough channels. And then Wi-Fi was invented, and suddenly that problem goes away. And that's a deep problem in regulation. Electricity in the United States, I don't know about it here, is regulated as though electricity generation and distribution were the same as it was in 1910. And it's changed quite a lot. So it's dangerous to be so enthusiastic on the basis of our present ignorance to say, aha, we'll cut Google in half, and that'll be great.
Okay, we're going to throw this open to the audience in a minute, but first, just a couple of comments.
I think you're absolutely right, Deirdre. Regulation's not the answer, but that's exactly what worries me, because we can't regulate them in the future because we don't know what's happening. But that is why I think there is a serious probability, I would say, a near certainty that they are going to take over the world. That computers are going to take over the world. Not in our lifetimes, but within the next 1,000 years. Will the world be run by humans or artificial intelligence? It's a no-brainer, literally.
Margaret Heffernan.
Yeah, and I think it's just really important for us to understand, in the light of the financial crisis, that we have seen what happens in markets. We have seen what happens in unregulated markets, the derivatives markets. I think that has led everyone to to question that markets are always intrinsically safe. And I would also say, I love technology. I've started 3 internet companies. I love this stuff. I use this stuff. I think it's wonderful. But I have also seen that power is innately, intrinsically corrupting. I have seen it in individuals, and I have seen it in organizations, and I have seen it in markets. And I see absolutely no reason on earth to imagine that technophiles are somehow immune to the disease of power in a way that nothing else is.
We've got 1 or 2 raving mics. Let me have a look. That was the first hand up.
A lot of the discussion revolved around maybe the dichotomy between government on the one hand as either an obstacle, a regulator of internet companies, and then the tech companies on the other hand. I was wondering if maybe you could discuss or explore a bit the idea of the connections between data companies and governments. So, for example, in the way they're used. So I think the majority of British MPs get some sort of funding from internet companies. In the US, I know data mining, politicians buying people's data from these tech companies has happened on a large scale, especially in the run-up to the 2016 election. So I was just wondering if you could talk about the interrelation and maybe the secret kind of almost revolving door between tech companies and the government and politicians.
Thank you very much. It's certainly true, isn't it, that the lobbying budgets of the big ones, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, are going up quite markedly. Taken as a group, they certainly are into the tens of millions in the United States every quarter now. So, Chi, as a member of the British Parliament, do you get a free laptop, or do you get help from... That's what you're saying, right? There's some sort of...
I get funding from the British public, and this tablet, Android, is funded by the British public and taxpayers. I don't get funding from Google, and any funding that I have to, or any freebies above a certain value, whatever, £50, £100, I have to declare. So I don't think, but I think the issue, if you're talking about, I think there are 2 big issues, which is the size of the lobbying budget and the fact that it's not transparent in this country, because unlike the US, we do not have a lobbying register. And also that government is looking to reduce costs in this government, by data sharing and data sale. I think that is absolutely right, and that is why we need digital rights for digital citizens, so that can't happen, because it's a real issue.
We'll not have all the panel comment on all of them, because lots of people want to ask questions. There's one right at the back.
When we're talking about the social impact of these companies, and particularly the other things that the people that found these companies put their money towards once they start to collect our wealth. What do we feel about the responsibility and the accountability of what they do with them? Because the two examples that spring immediately to my mind are Mark Zuckerberg recently. There was lots of stories about him giving a huge chunk of his wealth away to charity, but it was set up such that he maintained sort of essentially complete control over what that money went towards, even though it was described as being given away. How does the panel feel about the accountability of these projects when we have massive social and welfare issues around the world?
Thank you. So, Margaret Heffernan, I mean, you talked about need for greater accountability, but, I mean, can we go as far as saying to these companies, we prefer you studied this rather than that?
No, but I think what we can't do is trust them to choose, what areas are worthy of investment and which areas are not, which is why you need government. I mean, I was amazed the other day to learn, okay, so we're now going to get a Google Assistant that we can talk to and switch on our lights and heating. And I thought, isn't that fantastic? That's a problem we really don't have. And yet we have some very significant issues around social justice, around climate change, and so on, which are spectacularly, flagrantly not getting solved, not by the market, not by technology companies, not by anybody. So I think the truth is that these companies have every right to make whatever they want, but it's when we start to think that we can abdicate to them that the trouble really starts.
Anatol Koletsky.
Well, it is astonishing what they have been able to get away with in terms of tax avoidance, the kind of tax structures set up by Apple, Google, Facebook. If any oil company or any bank tried to set up similar structures, they wouldn't even be rejected. They would be sort of laughed out of court by their own accountants before they thought of setting up such a thing. So they have been able to get away with murder, in the very simple sense of tax avoidance. And I think that's changing. And I think within the next few years, we will see technology companies, internet companies, paying comparable tax rates to other entities. I think the question of what they do with the huge remaining amount of money that they will keep even after tax is a much more difficult one. What they do with their additional investment, not with the charitable activity and so on, but just what happens to the rapid and accelerating pace of the ability of computers to take over human functions. What are we going to do about that?
Professor McCloskey, when you just hear Anatol there saying that, likely more tax will be paid, but there'll still be massive profits. When companies get this big, is there an issue about some of these profits being used not to drive innovation, but to stifle competition? So the examples are, buying up small, innovative companies and then basically squashing them, so that they're not competition.
Here's an example. James Watt, the inventor of the separate condenser in the steam engine in the 18th century, had a monopoly of high-pressure steam engines for 20 years, and he would indeed buy up companies proposing to make railways out of them and suppress them. That's one reason I don't like intellectual property laws. But on this matter of the future of computers and technological unemployment and so on, I ask you to remember that computers and robots have these scary names, but they're tools. Hammers might be a scary name to someone who didn't like to hammer things. Or you might be against the steam engine because it'll cause, or the automobile will cause blacksmiths to be unemployed. And it's never been a serious cause of unemployment in the world.
There's a question on the right-hand side there, yes.
More recently, there's been almost a little rebellion against the larger companies, and people are trying to choose smaller companies, especially for food, and that's kind of translating more to technology now. Is there anything we can do to support the smaller companies with better social responsibility policies so that they have the opportunity to be viable to compete against these larger companies?
That's one for the Shadow Minister, I think. How are you going to encourage small, competitive, innovative companies?
That's a great question, and that is part of what, just to be clear, what competition policy, including the Competition Markets Authority, etc., should be, and we will be encouraging to be looking at. And practically, I think there are a number of things. more accountability, so more reporting requirements in terms of social responsibility, in terms of what's done with data, in terms of your digital rights. That will help. And also, I think we are seeing models, and I know the cooperative movement, the co-op is looking at this, for mutual-based platforms, which can, for example, bring potential taxi drivers into contact with customers not using the technology of the 19th century, but using today's technology, but without exploiting a power relationship right now that exists. You're right, we can do that, and those are some of the things we actually would be looking to bring forward as proposals to this government.
Margaret Heffernan, you say you go to Silicon Valley a fair amount. How do you see the small, new, young companies? I mean, it's very cheap to enter the market, everyone says. Are they strong enough to break through, or do they get crushed by the big players?
Well, in fact, what most of them try to do is position themselves so that they'll be bought by the new players.
They want to be crushed.
So actually, they kind of edit their thinking before they even start thinking, which I think is really concerning, because it means all sorts of stuff doesn't get developed. But I do think, if you want to see a really failed market, you can look at pharma. But equally, what we're starting to see there is a kind of some collaborative approaches to new drug development, which is both some smaller private entities together with some academic entities, together with some industrial entities, to do kind of the crowdsourced development of pharma in a way that the market has absolutely failed to supply. So I think there are alternative markets, and my recommendation is, keep an eye out for them and support them any way that you can. There are many, many, many ways to buy books that do not involve Amazon. Okay.
Another question, please. Yeah.
Hi there. One thing that actually concerns me about these big companies is actually the effect they have on freedom of speech. All of these things are moderated, whether it's taking down child pornography or taking down images of women breastfeeding. And most of their moderation policies are very much treated as company secrets. How concerned should we be about the transparency of these particular issues, considering the effect they have on politics and our daily lives?
Yeah, and Facebook was accused of liberal bias in its selection of the material it was putting up on the top of their lists.
Well, I'd like to. I completely disagree with you. I think there's nothing to do with freedom of speech. I think, on the contrary, these entities act as enormous megaphones which allow very small, often small minority opinions to be disseminated around the world. There's a huge difference between your freedom to express yourself and say whatever you want, and what you feel is your entitlement to spread that to everybody around the world and have Facebook or Google acting as a megaphone for you. In fact, one of the most dangerous effects that I think these companies are having is actually in disseminating what were originally quite small minority opinions and giving the impression, for example, at the evil extreme, that there are tens of millions of people who are racist, so, who believe that Jews, are plotting against the world. There used to be, small minorities, little cabals, but now you can connect yourself around the world. There are millions of people in America who believe that Barack Obama is not an American citizen. That is because of the power of the internet. So I think their ability to, and their curation obligations are actually a very serious obligation, which they don't take seriously enough. I think they should be suppressing false and dangerous information more than they do, rather than less, because they are megaphones.
Professor McCloskey.
Yeah, well, one historical fact. In the days before the innovation of steam, circular steam from the presses, in 1792, the government of the day owned, now hear this, secretly, half the newspapers in the kingdom. That's the enemy, dears.
And Chianwara, and then...
It's dangerous no matter who owns the newspapers, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or the government or nice boys with curly hair. For media to be owned by any entity is